Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity to welcome our panel to talk about Canada's approach to international collaboration in science and technology. I'm very honored to have a very distinguished panel today. I'll let everybody introduce themselves, and then I'm going to try to have a more dynamic session with a lot of questions and answers and questions from the audience as well, and we'll try to keep it brief. So I will start with Dr. Manuel Morales.
Hi, thank you very much for the invitation. So I'm going to introduce myself quickly so that we can move to the questions. So I'm Manuel Morales. I am a professor at the University of Montreal in the math department. I've been working a lot in collaborating with the financial sector in Canada, and that led me to the position I have now, which is Chief AI Scientist at National Bank of Canada. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Laura Beard. I'm an Associate Vice President for Research at the University of Alberta in Canada. I work mostly with social sciences and humanities and indigenous areas. Y quisiera decir también que es un gran placer estar aquí con ustedes. Y creo que vamos a hacer el panel en español, pero por lo menos quería saludar. Vamos a hacer el panel en inglés, pero por lo menos quisiera saludar en español y decir que es un placer estar aquí con ustedes.
Gracias, Laura.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joy Johnson. I'm the Vice President, Research and International at Simon Fraser University. It's a pleasure to be here. And in my role, I create opportunities for research at our university, but also I'm responsible for developing international research partnerships and mobility opportunities. And as you heard this morning from our president, I'm also responsible for our innovation strategy at Simon Fraser University.
Thank you to all of you, and I'm Lissa Matyas. I'm the Vice President of International Partnerships at Matyas. I'd like to start by asking the panel about the branding of Canada in terms of science and technology. So as a country with a relatively small population and one who is often overshadowed by the big gorilla that we talked about to our south, what is Canada doing in terms of putting ourselves on the map in the global science and innovation ecosystem, in your opinion? I'll let you start, Manuel, please. Yeah.
Well, I think one thing that we're doing right is the strategy in terms of funding fundamental research, but not only fundamental research, but also collaborative research. That means accelerating what we call research and development. And probably what I can do here is I can share my experience from my field of research and my domain of professional activity. So that's probably I could share that experience that I had with the AI success story, so artificial intelligence success story. I think that illustrates very well how this framework that we have in Canada, where we have means and mechanisms to fund fundamental research, both fundamental research and collaborative research, has bear fruit. When we hear about artificial intelligence, usually we think about what Google and Facebook are capable of doing in terms of recognizing images, recognizing text, understanding and translating text. Behind that, those applications, there's deep learning. Deep learning, it's a subset of machine learning, which was one among many different, very fundamental research fields that have been around for 30 years or so. But then they were possible because they were funded. They were fundamental research that were funded. And it was only until 2010 that the computer power was there that actually start using that fundamental research that was possible because of the funding that we had to actually start creating value. And that value, we can see it now in terms of all the startup ecosystem, all the technology transfer, technology system ecosystem that it's now possible thanks in principle by this fundamental research funding. All of that, it's also possible because funding and the strategy of enabling the transfer of technology, that's also very interesting concern, a very important concern in the Canadian strategy. Because, like it was mentioned this morning, yes, fundamental research is important, but then once we have that idea and those results, how we make the transfer from fundamental research to actually putting that into a way in which it can be applied and create value for the society. So that's also possible thanks to mechanisms that allow for mechanisms and institutions that allow for that mechanism for that transfer. Like I'm thinking Matyas and CERC that have those programs. So that I think that's. I want to stop there. So that's the experience that I have from the AI success story that illustrates how one of the things that we're doing right in Canada is caring for our researchers, our fundamental research, and caring also for that particular step of how you go from pure research to creating value for the society and the economic system. So probably I'll stop there and let the other people share their experiences.
So I think building on that, I would echo that idea of as a nation, Canada is investing in some of these larger pan-Canadian research projects where Canada sees areas of strength and investing in those kinds of areas of strength. So the artificial intelligence is one of those areas, and there is a pan-Canadian artificial intelligence strategy. So the University of Alberta is one of those AI hubs. There's also a Canada First Research Excellence Fund that is funding certain areas, and there's for innovation and breakthrough discoveries and emerging technologies and things. And so different universities have different projects going on. The University of Alberta has one in energy systems and future energy systems, and so that's a large project with lots of people involved in that. So there's a number of things like that going on across Canada. But a couple of the things that I would mention as I think important in Canada and things that Canada's interested in right now across our areas. One is all of the research funding agencies are focused right now on issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and what does it mean to do research in an ethical way, and what does it mean to try and get more diverse populations involved in the research projects. So not just having more diverse research teams in terms of gender and ethnicity and visible minorities, all of the different kinds of groups we want involved in our research, but what does it mean to ask questions in our research that means that our research is done in ways that are addressing issues of equity and diversity and inclusion, so that our research is having impacts in our societies that are addressing different kinds of questions. And so I think that's really important in Canada right now. I think that is something that is a connection between Canada and Mexico. And then the other thing also I would say here that Canada is quite interested in this area would also be around Indigenous issues. And so, and within research, what does it mean to do research in an ethical way, and research that's led by and with Indigenous peoples, and research ethics that is attentive to those questions. So all of those are much bigger discussions, but I'm just going to mention those here and then pasar la palabra.
Thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to be here in Mexico, and I can't help but observe how the political dynamics in Mexico are affecting science and technology at this time. And I would say the same is true in Canada. And when I think about Canada as a country and being a small population and how we put ourselves on the map, I actually wouldn't necessarily think about the areas, but I would begin by making a comment on our political context at this present time. And I think that traveling the world, one thing I would say is that to have open borders and to be in a country where we actually are very interested in collaboration is part of the brand of Canada at the present time, and something that as a university leader I'm very interested in promoting, because I think that does create an opportunity for all of us to be thinking about ways that we can build bridges and work together. It was mentioned earlier today, I think by Martha, a push on open science as well. And I think increasingly in Canada there is interest in global pursuits, in not going it alone, but actually looking for opportunities globally to develop partnerships. And that's so incredibly important as well for us to think about ways that we can build bridges. Science is no longer something that can be done in a single university by a single researcher. We heard from Nassif, teams are important, and we need to think about ways that we can actually help develop those teams globally. I really appreciated the comments by my colleagues here on the panel about fundamental research. And I would say, this has been a conundrum in Canada. I think we all can agree that we have excellent science in Canada, and we're known for our excellent science. We haven't always been able to push it forward into the commercialization that we'd like to see, or the valorization that we'd like to see. But that's, I think, part of our brand as well, and how I think we are setting ourselves apart. And then finally, I think we ultimately set ourselves apart by being good partners. And that's partly showing up. It's partly making commitments and trying to stick to those commitments and finding ways for us to work together. And I think that certainly in my experience on the international scene, those dynamics are very important and really can make a difference in terms of our international collaborations. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. So I think we're preaching to the choir here about the importance of science and technology collaboration between Canada and Mexico and other countries. But when you make an argument to some governments, it's always hard to justify why international collaboration in science and technology is a good investment. So in your opinions, what would be the economic and social benefits that would be derived from international collaboration in science and innovation, so that governments and others can see why it is a good use of taxpayer dollars to invest in these collaborations?
I'll go first. Yeah, well, I guess following up on my first idea when I answered the first question, I think science is a collaborative endeavor. I think we heard it earlier. We can accomplish so much more together than just one nation. And science, it's a very good example of that. Science doesn't have borders. I mean, the knowledge, the way we create knowledge is just by exchanging ideas. So clearly, and again, I'm going to fall back on the example of artificial intelligence. This pipeline or this process that I described earlier, research, pure research, technology transfer, and then actually implementation of that into the economic activity. Usually that's something that takes years, if not decades. But this example that we are living today with what machine learning and artificial intelligence has made possible happened very quickly, happened in the space of 10 years. And one of the driving factors behind that was exactly the fact that the community behind machine learning and deep learning technologies, it's an international community. So there was an exchange of ideas, and not only of the ideas, but there was a collaboration that was structured. So there were governments, there were funding agencies getting together to make sure that these scientists had the means to collaborate. So I think that's one example that illustrates what would be the benefits, what could be the potential benefits or the real benefits of international collaboration. And in this case, like I said earlier, these benefits, you can see it quickly, you can see it now, as you can see how companies and governments are starting to use this technology as we speak. And that's changing the way we do business, the way we do things, the way we process products. So I think that's one example that illustrates that very well.
Thank you. I think that in both Mexico and in Canada, we know that there are huge social benefits to working together on the large social and environmental and political and economic challenges that we face today in the Americas and around the world. We're living in a fractured and turbulent world right now. And so in those times, maintaining and nurturing and growing respectful and reciprocal relations is more important than ever. So I think that at universities, we know that in order to work together, we have to navigate cultural and linguistic differences, understand political tensions and complexities, and build consensus on sometimes controversial issues, right? International issues. And we do that work every day in universities, and we teach our students how to do that work. And, or we prepare them to do that work into the future. We teach them and we prepare them, I guess, in different ways. So we see political challenges around us, but we have to model that respect and reciprocity and responsibility to right relations that are needed in this world at the university to university level and at researcher to researcher level. And we heard about that some in the Banff International Mathematics and in other things that we've been talking about all day. And so I think these are the kind of benefits that are social benefits to the kind of work that we do, and that also have economic benefits. I think the discussions we've had about the equity, diversity, and inclusion, these have economic and social benefits in our nations, right? Things around, across all segments of our universities and societies. So when women and girls do well in the world, everyone does well in the world. So we know that there are social benefits and economic benefits to the work that we do. And I think we need to keep making these arguments for the work that we're doing. Thank you.
Great. So the question is about the benefits of international collaboration, and I'm going to enumerate, I guess, 4 benefits. I think, first of all, there's personal benefits about learning to be a global citizen. By working together, we learn about new ways of thinking, we learn about new cultures, new understandings, and so it benefits all of us through this collaboration, and I think it makes our societies better. I'd also say, and this point was just made, that there are social benefits. I'm going to give you a couple of examples that are close to home at Simon Fraser University. One, we had a researcher, his name's Peter Anderson. He was a basic scientist doing communication research. And he came to Mexico in 1985 at the time of the tragic earthquake here in Mexico. And through his work, he developed a communications strategy that really has changed the way we deal with disasters around the world. He's developed the United Nations' first internet tool for humanitarian relief activities based at SFU. And I think that demonstrates how a researcher doing work in an international setting with partners can not only lead to social benefit locally, but also globally. And it's those types of experiences, I think, that we need to figure out how to foster more and more. 2 other benefits I want to talk about that I think are relevant to politicians as well in particular. One is talent development. And we recognize that for many of the emerging industries that we don't necessarily have the talent that we require. So, for example, SFU is working with the India Oil Corporation at the present time. And we're working with them on talent development because they want to train researchers to work in the hydrogen fuel cell area. So they're sending master's students to become PhD prepared to Simon Fraser University to work with scientists in fuel cell technology, and then to go back to India, where they're trying to do a big economic play around fuel cell technology. So that's a wonderful partnership that focuses on talent development, but will have many ripple effects potentially within India. And I would say also, as an example of economic benefit, we see also companies like, as I said, India Oil Corporation, realizing that these types of partnerships, industry-university international partnerships, can also help them develop an economic benefit by improving their strategies, by thinking about ways in which they might be able to do their business differently. So it's these types of partnerships, industry, university, government coming together that I think can yield multiple benefits that can really be multipliers as well in terms of really making a difference to important issues in our society. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. I think we're doing pretty well for time, so I just have one last quick question. is there something that we can do to support Canadian and Mexican companies to work more closely together on technology transfer, commercialization, joint ventures? What collectively can we do to make that happen faster? I know Vivek and Andrew and others have talked about entrepreneurship and innovation, but then there's larger companies that might need our help as well.
Yeah. Well, I would like to add something here. Maybe I do not have very detailed answers to that question, but I can share what I have seen again in my field. So in the past years, so I think as it pertains to artificial intelligence and its applications, I think we have complementary forces. Like I do believe that, and I think I've talked to some of my colleagues here, that there's a critical mass here of people doing research that falls under the label of artificial intelligence. So that's a very wide concept that actually encompasses statistics, data science, operations research, computer science. But there's a critical mass here. In Canada, as I have seen lately, one roadblock that we are facing now in terms of developing further in terms of artificial intelligence, it's talent. We heard something about talent earlier. Is that if we want to keep growing, then we need to have more access to talent. We need to be able to train people that have the right skills and the right mindset and the right mathematical background to continue doing this research and this applied research. And that, as the ecosystem in Canada is growing, companies and researchers, research labs are finding themselves in a position where they cannot produce enough professionals and scientists. So it is clear to me that there's an opportunity here. We heard earlier today, this morning, that when it comes to metrics on how we measure the growth of or our achievements in science, there was one metric that caught my attention is the number of scientists per 1,000 people in the country. So in that respect, well, Canada is doing very well. We're a small country. Mexico, it's not doing so well in those terms because it's a large country. But in terms of absolute numbers, I think there's a lot of talent here. And there might be, that's food for thought. I think there are ways in which we can leverage that knowledge and talent in ways in which both countries can be can see benefits coming out of those interactions, both in the fundamental research, but also in the business and transfer technology transfer that might enable. That's something that I just wanted to share here. That's a thought that I've had.
Thank you. Did anybody else want to answer that question? Yeah.
So, it is a complex question, and I know it's late in the day. But I would say there are some other key strategies, and I'm not sure it's always the university that plays the role in relation to these strategies, but they can facilitate these strategies. One is, really business development tours, and we see our trade commissioners engaging in this all the time, and we often see universities joining these types of trade commission tours. Because I think companies need to get to know each other. They need to have opportunities to meet one another, find out what the opportunities are. And when I look at Mexico and Canada, we actually have a number of sectors that are of great interest to both of us, be that mining, be that the oil industry. So we have similar sectors that we're trying to build, change, develop. And so those are foci, I think. If we start to think about supply chain and opportunities, these would be areas. But we also have similar challenges. We talked about climate change. We talked about smart cities. So choosing some focus areas and thinking about ways that we actually could develop strong partnerships, I think, is important. And then ultimately, because this is ultimately relational. People have to meet each other, know each other, and then they have to be willing to share some things in order to actually develop that relationship. And so that's about, and I think the universities can play a role here. I think that data sharing is really important in terms of understanding supply chain and opportunities. They need to connect in terms of processes and find out ways in which they might be able to develop opportunities. And as I said, connecting people as well. We've had some experience about bringing startup companies to on missions to countries like China, for example. And these are really beneficial opportunities, giving companies, new companies, an opportunity to understand where the large manufacturers are, what opportunities might be out there for them in terms of new markets. And many of those spin-outs are coming out of our own universities. So again, finding ways for those collaborations to work together, I think, can make a huge difference.
So I'd like to add on to that, because I think that one of the things that universities can do, because universities are stable entities, governments change, as we know. So a government may be in place for 4 years or however long, and then you may have a new government in place. Businesses can come and go, and new businesses are coming up. A university may be in place for many years, and people may be in that university for many years. And universities are governed by a set of values that in many cases are core values that remain fairly stable, right? So universities have that ability to be that stable partner and have a responsibility to the communities that they serve and to the public good. And so I think that that's an opportunity that universities have in this area. So often universities, and we heard this morning in Simon Fraser, and I know the University of Alberta does this as well. We have a program called Tech Edmonton, where there's a partnership between the University of Alberta and the City of Edmonton with our Edmonton Economic Development Corporation that's helping to accelerate the growth of technology, emerging technology-based companies. And so there's a lot of work going on that, and then some of that can be globally facing as well. But then also universities help, so in addition to help start companies, universities also help to have the difficult conversations that are needed around these issues, just like we're having this today, and this was sponsored in part by UNAM and by Matyas and by other things. So last week at the university, we hosted an international symposium on navigating international research opportunities in times of global change. And there were panels on ethics, law, and policy, data in an international context, and dual-use research. So questioning some of the sometimes tricky things around these issues. And just yesterday and today at my own university, there's another conference going on, another international symposium on artificial intelligence, ethics, and society. And that's again co-hosted by the Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute, an electrical engineering institute, one of the local banks. There's digital scholars involved. There's scholars who've come from Germany and other places. And that's just 2 things in 2 weeks at one university. Other universities across Canada are doing the same kinds of things, right? So universities help provide spaces for these kinds of conversations and bring in experts and thought leaders from a variety of spaces to have the difficult conversations we need to have around some of the issues around this kind of work, and what does it mean, and what are the ethical issues involved. And so I think that's an important role that universities play as well.
Thanks very much. Do we have any time for a question or two, or we're running? Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Muchas gracias.